Welcome to Let's Talk Tech with NVTC, a digital series exploring tech's most notable trends, new innovations, digital transformations, lean agile principles and mindsets, the future of work, and more. We'll introduce next-gen leaders from member companies of the Northern Virginia Technology Council and learn about the great impact they are making in our region. I'm your host, Phillip Naithram. Welcome to Let's Talk Tech with NVTC. Today's episode will feature Old Dominion University's Dr. Michael Wu. And as always, we'll have our Did You Know segment at the end. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Accenture, American Systems, Consumer Technology Association, General Dynamics Information Technology, ICF, MITRE, TalkTech, Uninet, and our media partner, iHeartMedia. You can find all of our episodes on Wonk FM and the iHeartMedia podcast app. Now, I'm excited to introduce today's speaker from Old Dominion University, Dr. Michael Wu. He's the Batten Chair of Cybersecurity and Director of the School of Cybersecurity. We're going to discuss cybersecurity vulnerabilities and the amazing research that they're doing to develop an AI tool to help us get safer going forward. Please help me welcome Dr. Wu. Well, Michael, welcome to Let's Talk Tech with NVTC.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I called you Michael. Do you go by Mike also?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so you're here from Old Dominion University, and you're a researcher there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you found your way to Old Dominion to start doing your research and all of the great things you do over there?
Sure. So I joined ODU about 6 years ago. I was hired as a Batten Chair professor and a director to lead the cybersecurity program. I joined ODU with two missions. First of all, we want to develop a strong degree program to educate our students to join the cybersecurity workforce. And the second of all, we want to establish a strong research portfolio to develop new technologies, right, to support our industry, the government partners in the area of cybersecurity.
Yeah. How did you find yourself in a career of cybersecurity? Is that on purpose, or did you just sort of wind up there through some other things that happened in your life?
So that's a good question. I was trained as a computer scientist. And for a long time, I have been working in the area of computer networks, mobile wireless networks. And my early research mainly focused on the efficiency, right? How to make the network work better, more efficiently. How do we transmit data packets, for example, in a more reliable way? But over the time, we realized that in such systems, it's not just about the efficiency itself. And there are malicious activities going on in the network, in the systems. So that drew me into this cybersecurity area. There's just so much interesting research problems out there, and it's just evolving. Whenever a new computer systems come out, it comes with a cybersecurity problem or privacy problem that needs to be addressed. So it's fast evolving, but it's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's exciting, and it's, for me as someone on the outside, sometimes it can be overwhelming and it can be scary to think that there are so many vulnerabilities when it comes to data and privacy and what goes into cybersecurity. And it can, like I said, it can just feel overwhelming. So, hearing that there's people out there working on those problems and trying to come up with solutions is comforting. But, what does it mean? What is cybersecurity? It's such a broad term that we talk about. What does that mean? I hear other things like cyber hygiene, right? Digital exhaust and cleaning that up. Like, what are people talking about when they're mentioning these things?
Yeah, so cybersecurity, just in kind of in very broad sense, right? Cybersecurity focus on protecting our computers, our programs, right? Our networks and the data from attacks, destruction, or unauthorized access. So in the recent years, we have seen a kind of a surge of cyber attacks, and those attacks have become really more common, sophisticated, and harmful. And as a matter of fact, not a single organization or individual with an online presence is immune to cyber attacks. So we are all vulnerable. And the impacts of such cyber attacks can be really devastating, right? So as a result, just as you say, there is a kind of a surging demand for cybersecurity workforce. If you look at the market out there, there are about 500,000 cybersecurity job openings in the industry and the government agencies. In order to meet those demands, many universities have developed their cybersecurity programs to train the students, and ODU is one of them. Right, we started our cyber program in 2015. Our first cohort had only 11 students, and now the program has grown to close to 1,000 students just within a short 6 years. And we are now a national center of academic excellence in cyber operations. So I have been interacting with many people, right, including our students and also including our partners out there who may not know much about cyber. But in general, cyber hygiene is a first line of protection. Cyber hygiene refers to the practice and steps, right, people will take to maintain our system, computer system health and improve our security. So just a few very basic cyber hygiene ideas, very commonly used, and we highly recommend everybody follow those practices, right? So for example, use strong passwords will be a really good protection, against those password cracking attacks. Keep your system up to date. There's really not much you really need to do on your system, but just simply turn on this automatic system updates on your device. That will provide a lot of protection.
So why is it a good idea to always update our systems with the latest update that comes out? I mean, I only ask because, like, our phones, for example, sometimes the newest update, things don't always work correctly, or you lose some of the information. So I'm a little hesitant to do it. But now hearing that, that could be a form of protecting myself in terms of cyber hygiene and practicing good cyber hygiene, just like I wash my hands and I clean my living space and I brush my teeth and I have, bodily hygiene, practicing something like that with my devices that are connected to the internet where I'm vulnerable sounds like a good idea. But why, you mentioned updating, you turning on the notifications and making sure that we automatically update our systems. What is it about that that helps us?
Right, very good question. Our computer systems were all made by human beings, and as a human being, we make mistakes. Computer system includes both software and hardware, and they both have vulnerabilities. None of our software is perfect. Some of those vulnerabilities can be discovered by the attackers. And for us, cyber professionals, we want to discover those vulnerabilities before attackers, right, discover them and take advantage of those vulnerabilities. So periodically, cyber professionals will understand, look at the system, understand, the weakness, the vulnerabilities, and make those patches to fix those problems even before the attackers can really launch any attacks by leveraging those weakness. So that's why, we periodically receive those patches, those updates, right, from the vendors. It's important to update the system by installing those patches, because if you do not install them, the attackers would know, and the attackers understand that those are the well-known vulnerabilities, and there could be some attacks already developed to take advantage of those weaknesses. So it's very important to turn on your system, with this automatic update.
What are some of the other things? So we mentioned making sure that you pick strong passwords, updating your system, but there's also third-party security, firewalls and VPNs. I mean, how do you feel about those just from a regular individual consumer, not a business entity or definitely not a government entity like a .mil or a .gov, but just the average person?
Right. So for an average person, you can use VPN that provides additional protection, and also try very hard, right, to be very careful, look at your emails, your text messages, be very cautious about those suspicious links in those messages to avoid the phishing scams. And there's a report talking about 90% of the cyber attacks start with a single click on those phishing links. And also install antivirus protection is helpful on your device. Just make sure that you have a protection there to always monitor the new websites, new web pages, the new programs that have been installed on your computer. Another, I would say the last but not least important practice is to back up your data. There is no silver bullet that can defeat all cyber attacks. There is no such perfect protection. So if you unfortunately became a victim of a cybersecurity incident, right? The only guaranteed way to repair your computer might be to erase and reinstall the whole system. So, all of your data will be lost without a backup. So that's very important to do.
What are some, like, you mean like a Dropbox or even on an external hard drive? Like,
it could be, yeah. So for example, I have two backups on my computer. One is an external disk. So I'm a Mac user, so I automatically just back up my data to that external disk. And at the same time, I use Google Drive to upload my data to the cloud as a backup. And of course, you can always choose to encrypt your data before you do the backup to make sure that they are safe. Yeah.
Now, so we're talking about an individual. These are some of the techniques that an individual can do to practice good cyber hygiene. And, to just already, as a matter of practice, not even it, we mentioned a few products, but it doesn't sound like you need to go out and buy this huge big product for yourself as an individual. What about businesses and a business entity? What are some cyber hygiene protocol that every business, like some of the listeners here, should be practicing as an entity for all of the numerous computers that they have and their data as a company, financial data, customer data, IP, whatever they're working on?
Right. So yeah, very similar cyber hygiene practices should be used in business setting, right? Very similar. For example, you want all the employees to choose strong passwords, and this is not always the case. So, for example, I talked to some of our industry partners. Many industries use those different devices like sensors, some of those small portable devices. And we have seen many of those devices are poorly protected by using very weak passwords or sometimes no passwords at all. So cyber hygiene would help. And again, in the business setting, you also want to keep your system updated, and you always want to make sure that we have a way to look into the phishing emails, phishing messages, right? Those sort of things. So cyber hygiene will be the very first step for protection. It's helpful, but eventually it's going to be hard for humans, right? Even in a business setting, it's going to be hard for humans to keep up with cyber attacks. Cybersecurity must be achieved by using those automated tools, by using the cyber tools. And in the business setting, the traditional IT security solutions is very similar to building a castle, right? So you mentioned about the data. Yes, the data on the data servers. And very often we put the data server inside a so-called castle, right? And it's very well protected. There's only one way to access the data, through a so-called drawbridge. And in other words, that's our firewall. And firewall is often the single most important defense of our cyber system. And we implement a variety of different measures at the firewall, right, to check the incoming and outgoing traffic, to enforce those security policies. So that is basically the current practice, and it's very well studied approach, and have been there for many years. But at the same time, we have seen some kind of new vulnerabilities going on in the cyber world, especially in a more distributed and also kind of non-centralized way. So for example, right, you can put your server inside that castle. But how about those distributed devices? For example, in an industry setting, there are so many sensors needs to be protected. There are meters needs to be protected. There are those portable devices. So it's going to be very hard to build a castle to include all of them. And that's fundamentally challenging, and in some way it's just impossible. So we are working on a very exciting new idea, right? So instead of building those defensive fences and gates to trying to keep the threat outside our cyber system, we kind of envision a immune system, including those defensive cells throughout the entire body of our cyber system, right? And which can detect the existence of new threats, right? Analyze their behavior and implement appropriate defense measures, right, to neutralize those threats. So it's a very ambitious goal, but we are currently working on the very first step to achieve this goal. Our approach is to embed artificial intelligence into the cyber systems, right? Such that our this AI-based technique can differentiate the system's normal activities from the intruder's activities. Or in other words, this is very similar to the human's immune system that can differentiate self, right, and non-self components, and you try to eliminate those non-self components. So this ultimate goal is to just use AI to protect our cyberspace. We currently have a few research projects funded by, for example, National Science Foundation, DoD, Office of Naval Research, NSA, and also the Virginia Commonwealth Cyber Initiative to study those research problems, and hopefully we'll get a new solution, down the road that can really support this idea of immune system for our cyber networks and those computers.
Yeah, and is that the practice that you head up at the university to do this research and to come up with this AI tool that would, it sounds like it almost works like antibiotics in a way where you're going to implement that into the system and it would be able to fight off any attacks once it senses that it's there. Mm-hmm. But is that, so when I'm thinking of this, I'm thinking of like, you have a business and there's probably, let's say there's 1,000 laptops out that are all tying back to the same central system. Are you going to be giving that Z-Pack or those antibiotics to each one of those machines? Or is it just going, like, how do you protect it? Because I think you were kind of alluding to that too. There's so many vulnerabilities, especially now that everyone's working from home. It's not like they're all in the same place, tied into the same network that's central in one location.
So it will not be on a central location. So basically you can think about that system will gather information, right, from many distributed devices. You can gather information from, for example, a laptop, from a mobile phone, or from a sensor. It will also gather information through the network. There are packets transmitted back and forth between those devices. So this intelligent unit will be distributed, and then they will collaborate, right, to do the right job to recognize the abnormal activities going on, either in the overall network or on the individual devices, and they go from there, trying to neutralize those malicious activities.
And it won't just send a notification that, hey, something's happening. It will actually take an action and do something to solve it.
That's a very good question. So there are two steps. The step one is to do the detection, right? We want to accurately detect, the malicious activity from the normal activities. And once we have the detection done, the actual action following that may depend on our confidence of the system. So if the confidence is really high, then yeah, go ahead to take action to remove some of those malicious activities. But sometimes, none of the system is perfect. So it's intelligent, it's smart, but at the same time, it can also make mistakes. So we don't want such a system to, behave in a kind of crazy way and just to wipe out, a lot of, good things going on in the system. So the one possible, way to use such a system is to report to the right people, right? System administrator, for instance, such that they can take a look, verify, hey, this is a real problem. So they will go from there to take the actions, or maybe it's just a normal activity, but this intelligent AI system has never seen that kind of activities going on. So we just assume that's malicious.
Yeah, now you mentioned you're doing this research in connection with a couple of government agencies and some other research bodies. And I think one of the first things that popped into my mind is, there's always this concept or this idea of who's watching the watcher, right? Who guards the guardian? What about the AI? Because it's machine learning, it's AI. Isn't it vulnerable all by itself? Like it's fixing a problem, but it's also on a network and part of the internet. And isn't it vulnerable also?
Yes, absolutely. Excellent question. So yeah, AI itself is a cyber system. The AI is implemented most of the time, right? It's implementing the software, it's running on the hardware, and recently there are also the hardware-enabled AI solutions. But overall, it's just another cyber system. It's very intelligent, it's smart, but it has vulnerabilities, and that has been reported recently. And so those AI models are subject to attacks, possible attacks, right? So I have given a few talks recently about why I think the current, AI or deep learning is just like a wild west. This is very similar to the internet, right? About 60 years ago, people have concentrated a lot on how to make it work. Nobody knows how it works. So people were just concentrate so much on how to make it work, how to transmit packets in a reliable way, efficient way. How do we, make sure that data transmission is fast enough to support those new applications and things like that. Security and privacy were not the integral component of the internet back then. Until later on, right? People start to use the internet for backing, for transmitting those sensitive information. Now, people understand that without security and privacy, the internet will not be very much useful. So currently, AI and the machine learning community is in a very similar, kind of situation as the early stage of internet. The vast majority of the AI or deep learning community focused on the model accuracy and efficiency, right? Just make sure that our AI model can do really the job, but security and privacy are falling behind. So we have been really look into that problem, and we have multiple new research projects that focus on the security and the privacy side of the AI models. So for instance, one of the very interesting problems we have studied so far is the so-called backdoor, what we call a neural backdoor. So the neural backdoor is a kind of a covered functionality, right, in the AI model, such that whenever the attacker supply a special pattern, which is called a trigger, then it can cause the AI model to behave in a incorrect way, right? It will do the so-called misclassification. So just give you an example. Let's assume that there is a authentication system, right? The video surveillance authentication system, at a gate of a secured, a building, for example. It could be a White House, for instance. So you can imagine that this video camera, right, will just take a kind of a video or picture of everybody's face whenever a person tried to enter the gate, and it will do analysis, right, and a match with the database to figure out whether the person is allowed to enter or not. So a lot of those video analysis or image analysis nowadays is done by using the AI or the deep learning models. So if the attacker built a backdoor into the AI model, the consequence could be something like this, right? So the attacker will pre-design a so-called trigger. So maybe the trigger could be something like this, just a small pattern like this, right? Having it on the jacket, any random person with this trigger, right, on the jacket can just work it in there, and it will activate the backdoor, so the AI model will just recognize this person as a legal, person, authorized person to enter the building. So that is a kind of a serious threat. And the challenging about this backdoor detection is that the AI model is so sophisticated, includes millions of the parameters. And it's very hard for anybody, human beings, to understand the AI model at this stage. We know it works, but we don't know exactly how it works, and it becomes even more difficult to analyze the potential problems. So
yeah, I mean, and that's why, you mentioned like the White House. The reason why I brought up like some of the government agencies that have funded some of this research, because I think that, especially the community of people that are part of NVTC and around the Beltway, many of them are federal services contractors, and they're all trying to find a solution to securing the .mil, the .gov, securing government data and information. But it sounds like we're saying that like, well, here's an AI solution, but this is also vulnerable. So what's the solution to that solution? Another AI solution that's then vulnerable? Aren't we going in like a circle?
It's a very, very interesting question, right? So yeah, we are kind of in that loop, in that circle right now. So that's why we are working on those research projects. So for example, we have multiple active research projects, funded by the federal agencies to study basically two problems. Number one, we want to look into the existing AI models to fully understand the vulnerabilities, right? What are those problems out there? So we have discovered a couple of very, kind of impactful neural backdoor attacks that can happen to the current deep learning models, and we report them in the recent conferences. And on the other hand, we try to develop those technologies to do the detection and mitigation of those backdoor attacks. So for example, if a company got a AI model and trying to integrate that AI model into their system, right? For example, this is surveillance system I mentioned earlier. So is there anything we can do to fit this AI model into some sort of examination machine, right? Fit it in there to do a detection. So we are developing that technology to look at any AI models out there, and we'll be able to detect whether the model contains a neural backdoor or not. So it's still going on, but we have a couple of solutions out there, and it has been very promising so far.
Yeah, it sounds like part of your research is addressing that problem, and you're finding something that will evaluate. So that's actually a tool that evaluates AI implementation, not necessarily the AI implementation that you can use to monitor things. How does it evaluate whether or not there's threats? Does it give you a list of potential threats, or is there a percentage of like it's 50% safe or 70%? Like what do you get? How do you know you're doing well?
Right. So, for example, one of our approaches, to examine the AI model, right, to do a kind of reverse engineering of the AI model, and that process will give us a output, and that output basically will shows that whether those reverse engineered pattern will be something more like a trigger, or it could be just some random pattern. So based on that, we can, kind of examine the output, and then we can figure out, whether it's more likely to be a AI backdoor, or it just, a benign model. Yeah, I think to kind of just get back to your question, so there is a confidence, associated with our result. So it could be very high confidence, right? 99% sure that this is a backdoor, and we need to address that. Or sometimes the output could be, something with low confidence. In that case, some more studies needs to be done to manually look into the AI model and try to do some further examinations.
Yeah, it sounds like either way, there's going to be a human being there that has to make a judgment call based on the information and their experience and the data that they have. Do you see this being eventually, so is this being developed for businesses and companies, or is this also something that maybe as individuals we can use in our home networks to protect ourselves? It's, a lot of people say, oh, no one wants my data, they're not looking for me. And they're actually looking for people that say precisely that, because they're less likely to protect themselves. You're exactly who they want.
Yeah, it applies to both. So it applies to any system that use the AI technology, right? So in the business setting, they have been using a lot of AIs there. So it's definitely, there's definitely a need out there. And for the individuals, even sometimes we don't know we are using AI, but actually the AI models are running there. So for example, just those smart devices at home, right? The Amazon Echoes and other, those smart assistant devices, they will use AI to recognize our voice, to take the commands, convert it into some real system commands and execute them. And they are subject to similar those neural backdoor attacks.
Yeah, I mean, how do you evaluate the difference between your voice that was recorded through one of those devices and your actual voice? Right? Like, what if, it's something to consider, right? As we think, oh, it's a voice print, it makes us more safe. It's like, well, that's also vulnerable, and you can agree to purchase things that you didn't want to purchase or do other things. Like, it's possible. And I'm just some guy. If I could think of it, someone who actually knows what to do might be thinking of it too, right?
That's an excellent question. I think that still a lot of research are going on along that direction. Somebody can record the voice. Even for the face recognition, we have seen, people, record the face, right? And then, so none of those solutions are perfect right now. And so I think that's an interesting part about cybersecurity. It's a never-ending game or never-ending battle. And also, there is always a balance between security and usability. You can make the system super, super secure, but you just add layers of protection and makes the system less usable. So there is kind of always a kind of balance, between those two.
Yeah. Well, lots to think about. I'm sure the people listening in have tons of questions. I probably can talk to you all day with all of mine, but I really appreciate you being here and sharing with us some of the research that you're doing for the university and in connection with some government agencies. And it sounds like a lot of great things are happening, and you're helping us by building a workforce of cybersecurity professionals coming out, right? You're up to, did you say 1,000 or a little bit more than that?
Yeah, we have close to 1,000 students enrolled in the program. So we have a undergraduate degree program in cybersecurity and also a master degree in cybersecurity. The undergraduate degree has about 850 students, and the graduate program has about 150 students there. Still, it's not enough. We can only produce maybe 100 students every year to join the workforce. But just look at how many job openings out there. It's 500,000 job openings, and every year this new openings are added into the pool. So there's still a long way to go. But if every university is doing something like this, I'm hopeful that after a few years we will fill the gap, in terms of cybersecurity workforce development.
Yeah, and at least for the people around the Beltway here, they know that they can come to you if when they're looking for the newest talent. So
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Philip.
Before we go, let's talk about Did You Know? Did you know? The average time to identify and contain an attack is 280 days, and the average cost per data breach in the US is $8.64 million. It's estimated that cybercrime will cost the world $10.5 trillion annually by 2025. The US employs 942,000 people in cybersecurity positions. Over 520,000 job openings exist, and approximately 58,000 are in Virginia, the highest demand in the nation. We hope you've enjoyed today's program, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Check out nvtc.org for more information.
We look forward to seeing you at next month's Let's Talk Tech with NVTC. In the meantime, follow us at Nova Tech Council on Twitter and LinkedIn, and remember to sign up for the latest tech news at nvtc.org.